So I want to name you some of the most iconic rap albums of all time, and I want you to tell me if they're contenders for being one of the greatest rap albums of all time.
I'm down. Okay, let's do this.
All right. My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy by Kanye West.
Absolutely.
Okay. Aquemini by Outkast.
No doubt.
Get Rich or Die Trying by 50 Cent.
Absolutely.
Okay. Illmatic by Nas.
Of course.
To Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar.
Absolutely.
Ready to Die by Biggie.
Yes, sir.
Black on Both Sides by Mos Def.
It's in that conversation.
The Blueprint by Jay-Z.
Yes, sir.
2001 by Dr. Dre.
Absolutely, no doubt.
The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill by Lauryn Hill.
Absolutely, man. Come on, like, okay, this is the thing, though, is that you just named me some of the best albums of all time, but I think the more interesting conversation to be having here is what is the greatest, because everyone does their top 10 lists, all right? And, like, you know, we're guilty of it as well. I mean, we've done it in the past, but, you know, the conversation of what is the greatest, you know, singling out that one album from everything else, like, what do you think goes into that? Because there's people that do it, you know, as casual listeners that haven't, you know, dove into the genre way too much. And then there's the hip-hop historians who have that same conversation. So I feel as if there's a relatability factor with it. So what goes into it for you, you know, as like a hip-hop fan?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that go into it. One of them definitely being having a track list that has no skips. Another big moment, another big thing for me too is having an album that really pioneered a way within the genre and also did something that is really recognizably special and that really shifted the landscape of hip-hop. That's kind of what I'm searching for, because when it's the greatest of all time, you have to, you know, consider everything. You have to consider the entire history of the genre. And by the way, guys, before we go further with this, let us know down in the comments what your pick is for the greatest rap album of all time. We're always interested in hearing your takes, but what goes into it for you too? Because I know that having that classic stature and being implemented into pop culture really matters too, right?
Absolutely. But I think I see it from more of a subjective point of view where, like, it's the album that have just, like, blown me away, like, the most over time. Like, I feel as if with the greatest of all time conversation, you know, every time you hear it, it feels like a different experience too. That's something that I really pick out of, like, you know, the albums that you even named. It's just like that greatest standpoint has to be, you know, a piece that has been, you know, growing over time and growing with the sonics of, like, you know, the music industry. Like, that's something I feel as if is so important, because the artist's vision may not only come out through the project, but you might have only seen his vision 10 years down the line, or, you know, 25 years down the line. And that's what I find genius about, you know, the greatest album of all time. Is that I have mine, and I started recognizing it more and more and more as I started, you know, into my listenership, but it was always something super important to me. So it's a good conversation today. It's definitely
and I also feel like it's kind of easier to slot in like albums from, let's say, the 90s or the 2000s, because we've had the time to see the effect that they've had on the culture. We've had the time to see how the replay value has progressed over the years. And not only that, but how they've influenced other artists to come, because I'm sure we'll get some people in the comments, you know, writing down that Whole Lotta Red's the best album of all time. But I feel like there has to be a point where you kind of cut it off. Like, any albums from the 2020s should not be in this conversation to me.
I don't think so. Not at the moment, at least. Okay, but let's get started with this. So I wanted to bring in 2001 as one of the first albums I talk about, because this was one of the first albums that I ever listened to where I was absolutely blown away by the sonics of it. Because I remember, you know, I had gone and, you know, got that CD when I was a kid, and I popped it into, you know, my mom's Caravan player, and dude, I promise you, like, I never heard an album like that in the car. And then, you know, we were talking about track lists and how important those track lists are. I could read throughout all of 2001, and you will not find a single flaw within that album. It was perfectly executed. And I also love the chemistry that lies within that album. I think it's one of the most underrated components of it, and one of the greatest displays of teamwork that I've ever seen on an album of all time. So example, you know, bringing in Eminem, bringing in Snoop Dogg, bringing in Nate Dogg, bringing in Exhibit, bringing in Hitman. Like, these were a cast of rappers that were taking over a sound back then and completely revolutionized it. Plus, the live instrumentation within the album is absolutely mind-blowing. The sonics that you are listening to not only revolutionized G-Funk, but they revolutionized the whole hip-hop industry. And then you saw what that did for other rappers down the line. So I think when we're talking about 2001...
Is it like top 3 for you?
Dude, listen,
or is it number 2? It's number 2, right?
I think it's number 2, but to be honest with you, like, I've had this at number 1 on some days, and that's the thing with my other album, is like, it's always a toss-up, but I saved it for the end of the conversation.
2001 is a great pick because I feel like it's the all-star rap album, because Dr. Dre's kind of curating it, but he's not really rapping on all that much of the tracks.
It's the best curated album of all time.
You have Hitman, who's going crazy. You have Eminem, and this album is kind of responsible, or at least partially responsible, for launching his career. That was a massive moment. And you have Corrupt, you have Snoop Dogg, you have Nate Dogg. So many of the prominent voices from the 90s all coming together.
And not only that, but this was the coolest part about the album, is that it almost feels like a movie, because Dr. Dre is putting you into LA culture and he's making you understand what's going. So it's either like, you know, pause for porno skit, bro, or like, you know, let's say the other skits that are within it, how the album starts, you know, like there's so many different, look, even Mark's smiling in the back row, because it's just such a great fucking album. Like,
yeah.
I've never had a bad time with it. And when I was mentioning at the beginning of this conversation that, you know, an album needs to, you know, sort of show me value every single time that I listen to it again, this is what 2001 does. Either if it's a drum pattern or how something's hitting or a verse, like,
yeah,
I'm always amazed by something new that I hear throughout the album.
The production is A1, bro. And you look at like the analog synths, when you look at the hard-hitting bass lines, Scott Storch's fucking pianos, bro. I mean, what's also impressive is the fact that they actually recreated a lot of the samples that they wanted to use to not go through that issue of sample clearances. So what they did here, also bringing in a darker feel, because he kind of expanded on the G-Funk sound that he brought in with the Chronic, but he's like, let me make it more ominous through the strings and the dark keyboard rips. Everything was just absolutely genius, and I don't think it's the best gangster rap album of all time, but it's definitely, like, let's say top 3.
Okay,
it's in that conversation.
I could respect it. I see it as like being, you know, like the Avengers of rap. Like, it's just like, it's even deeper than that. It was just such a moment for hip hop too, to witness all of it. And what I also love about the album is, like, you have some of the most classic tracks of all time in the genre on that track list. Like, you know, The Next Episode, or Still Dre, Forgot About Dre. Like, you know, even at that, like, you know, What's the Difference is one of the best Eminem and Dr. Dre collaborations of all time. Like, you know, songs like Lightspeed, Act Right, like Housewife. There's just so many good songs on that album that have to make me put it into this conversation. Baloo, man, let's take it to another one.
I'll go to another pick, and this is not my number one, but what's interesting is that that's what's cool about the best rap album conversation. Facts. Is that it's not necessarily going to be my favorite album. So the next pick I'm going to say is number 2 in terms of what I think is the best album of all time, but it's not necessarily number 2 in the ranking of my favorites. It's just for this conversation, and it's Ready to Die by Biggie.
All right.
And listen, when you're talking about a gangster rap album, to me, this is the best. Like,
this is over 2001.
This is the mecca for me. This is the one that really defines the genre, and it was just so refreshing to have Biggie come in the mid-90s, because it was around this time where the West Coast scene was fucking dominating, and we needed more limelight on the East Coast, and you have Biggie coming in, and for the first time ever in hip-hop, it felt like we got a persona that was larger than life. It felt like we got a character that was so interesting to dive into and to explore, because it was a fictionalized version of his own life, and that's exactly what Ready to Die is. It's kind of this autobiography of Biggie. Obviously, you know, certain things are exaggerated, but it was cool to see that he wrapped this whole album up and made it kind of a whole retelling of his life from birth to his fictional suicide at the end of the album. And when you're talking about craftsmanship and skills as an MC, nobody touches the flow that Biggie exhibits on that album.
That's facts.
Nobody touches it. Facts. And to me, Ready to Die is the most complete rap album, because you do have Biggie talking within certain tropes within the gangster rap field, but he's flipping it on its head. He's kind of rewriting the script on your traditional gangster rap album, just because he's showing you the pitfalls as well. Like, he's taking you through the depression, the paranoia that comes with being in that life. And not only that, but it was a perfect marriage between Diddy and Biggie, because Biggie kind of wanted to be more aggressive and more raw in terms of his beat selection, but Diddy's like, we got to make this shit sell. We got to have this music playing in the club. So that's where a sample like Juicy comes in to kind of have more of that pop feel, where Biggie could still kind of give you that nice storytelling that you go to him for, but just have it appeal to a wider audience. So it was a perfect combination of so many different sounds, and I think that when you're looking at a track list that's flawless from start to finish, something that feels cinematic through the skits, it checks every box for me. It really does, man.
Oh, when you go through that checklist, I don't think you're going to have anything, unchecked, because what's so interesting about Ready to Die is I feel as if it's not only, cinematic in approach, but it changed the way people, started doing their albums, because I feel as if also, like, for the commercial success that this album had, especially, being that, breakout on the scene, Biggie project, it's still, like, it's quality, bro. Like, it's like he was selling movies with this album. Like, I feel as if when you have to talk about, the cinematography within it, and just like being in that zone where you feel like you're watching like a 90s movie, about, a New York gangster going through life. Like, I feel as if no album does that better than Ready to Die. And plus, like, what you were saying about his flow and cadence is spot on. Like, to this day, I think that, you have never heard someone, with that type of flow or cadence on a track, and it's so unique and approach.
So fluid,
because
bro.
Not only
it's
that,
so fucking fluid, that flow, because it's so dynamic, man.
And there's just so much that goes into it too, like the way that he uses melodies to be able to groove you into his verses while having these tight-knit concepts is super interesting about his writing, and you get the double side of Biggie, you get the aggression, but you start to understand him as a person and what drives that aggression. And I think that that's what's so interesting about the character development of Big Papa, is that, you start to see like how he's developing into this character, and he's a dynamic character throughout it, because the way he starts the album is completely different than the way it ends. So yeah. I have to agree with you. It's definitely in that conversation.
One of the greatest of all time. But okay, let's answer the question finally. What is the greatest rap album of all time to you?
So in my opinion, it is To Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar. And, if you guys have been following the podcast, you guys know how big of a fan I am of Kendrick Lamar. I've been following him for the longest time. And, To Pimp a Butterfly is still, questioning me to this day. Like, I feel as if I still have a challenge going through To Pimp a Butterfly, just for how hard it is, to break down. And I love how many angles Kendrick took here, especially throughout the writing. Like, you're gonna get some of the best storytelling cuts of all time with songs like How Much a Dollar Cost, or how, even Mortal Man. The way that he was able to string together the Tupac, poem throughout the whole track list was fantastic.
Starting off these walls and then continuing song
nuts,
after
dude.
song.
The track list order was absolutely genius. I also think when, you look at the political messaging within the album, it's super important on that run as well. When you look at the production, you have some of the best producers of all time touching this album. Just looking at the features too, like, super calculated. Nothing felt out of place with The Pimp a Butterfly. When you have to talk about what was the perfectly, crafted album, in my opinion, it is that. Like, even looking at it, the hints of, Thundercat in there, and then Snoop Dogg, and then Rhapsody. Like, there's just so many different rappers that fit into that world and what had to come with it. And what I found interesting about Tip of a Butterfly is that apparently Kendrick had gotten the inspiration, while on tour, and that's what he was talking about, while he was in Africa. And, you could see how he's really touching, not only, the roots of his culture, but the roots of the human soul throughout the album, and explaining how certain emotions conflict with you, and explaining how, character progression is done through life. And that's what I found beautiful about the album, is like, there's so much layering in it, and there's so many different ideas that are being, poured out throughout the writing. Yeah. And when you also got to think about the type of production, like, just having this modern sort of, I would say, feel on jazz, and, that sort of, soul rap was beautiful too, and bringing that together, and that was never really seen in the industry as well. Like, just the way he did it, it was obviously seen through like projects like, let's say, The Roots, let's say Undone, that had that similar type of production and style, but it was different too, because it also had a G-funk hint to it as well. Like, you had songs like Hood Politics that sound completely different than the rest of the track list. And that's another thing, when you have to look at track by track by track by track, everything is completely different, but still keeps you immersed into this beautiful universe that Kendrick Lamar is, keeping you in. And if you guys want to actually go through more, of an in-depth analysis on Tip of a Butterfly, Kendrick just did a podcast on it, and you will understand how emotionally deep this album is. And when I think about, writing and production combination and vision of an album, this is the best album I've ever seen executed, in my opinion.
It really is up there. I think that maybe I have an issue with putting it at number one right now, because it is kind of fresh. It hasn't been 10 years yet, but it's definitely a strong contender. And I just feel like what Kendrick did best here in terms of what he did for the culture is he pushed the boundaries of what a concept album could be, because when you look at how multi-layered the metaphors and the symbols are within the album, just when you look into the meanings of what the caterpillar represents, what the butterfly represents, what the cocoon represents, there's so many layers to it. I don't want to get into it now because we'd be here for fucking hours. I mean, you could do a whole podcast on that one album, for fuck's sake.
People have,
literally, man. And I also love that he also transcended beyond music with this album. And obviously, when you look at songs like All Right, that ended up becoming, you know, a protest song for the Black Lives Matter movement, as well as other police brutality movements. And you look at a song like King Kunta, and that kind of revitalized that competition, and also the idea of having that pride as an MC to write your own rhymes. He kind of, you know, put everybody on blast and said, like, I'm one of the only ones that's still doing it by myself, just me and my pen. So that was cool to see as well. And you also have to bring Good Kid, Mad City into the conversation. It's not my #1 pick, but I just feel like Kendrick dropped 2 back-to-back masterpieces, and I would be okay with anybody telling me that Good Kid, Mad City is that top spot, or To Pimp a Butterfly is that top spot, because to me, Good Kid, Mad City is maybe the album that feels the most like a movie that I've ever heard in my entire life, and To Pimp a Butterfly is kind of the novel version of that.
Oh, that's true. I feel as if To Pimp a Butterfly is a much more technical album, maybe, and I think
more detailed and descriptive as well.
But I think that's where I find value in it. It was just so impressive because, again, we were talking about this at the beginning of the episode. When you go through an album and every single time you listen to it, there's a new surprise that you find, and there's something beautiful throughout it, and you're just like, whoa, I didn't hear this on the 256th fucking time. You know, I got it only now. That's how I know I'm still enjoying this, and that's timeless music to me.
Let me ask you this. Do you think that our community and like the overall hip-hop community has To Pimp a Butterfly as their #1? Do you think it's the most popular choice?
Well, I know it's the highest rated album of all time. I think
it has like a 96 on Metacritic or something.
I think it is like the highest rated album of all time. And listen, you know, it's subjective at the end of the day. I don't think that it's synonymous because, you know, I think there's conversations for other albums, to be honest with you. But if we had to have this conversation, because we're on a podcast right now, this was the album I wanted to bring in because I feel as if I can make the most argument for it. Whereas if with other albums, I could still make argument for it, but this just like edges it out as far as like what I'm hearing, you know, and like what I felt at least throughout my listening experience, because this album came out in 2015, right? Like, I started my hip-hop listenership maybe around like the late 2000s decade. Like, this for me was like one of the first albums that gave me some sort of taste in music, like starting to understand like what's going into an album. So that's my pick for the greatest of all time, guys. Let me know if you agree with it. But Lou, let's get on to yours.
So my pick is an interesting one because I feel like it's the easy answer, but I also think that it's the right answer. Okay. And my pick is Illmatic by Nas, which came out in 1994. And Illmatic is kind of seen as, let's say, the Godfather or the Citizen Kane of hip-hop, just because it's the album that I feel like gets cited as the greatest of all time by everybody, but it is for good reason. When you think about the fact that Nas crafted this and wrote the album in his teenage years and displays a fucking vocabulary that a college professor would have, it's absolutely mind-blowing. And when you look at what he did for New York alongside the Wu-Tang Clan and Biggie and Mobb Deep and all the other prominent acts within the mid-90s, you have to understand that what Nas did was so unique because he brought a poetic substance not only to New York hip-hop, but to the entire scene that it was unprecedented at that time. And when you're looking at this album, it's only 10 songs, and what a fucking triumph it is because he's taking you through these first-person narratives with so much descriptive imagery associated to his experiences growing up in the projects. And I think that for its time, it was the most advanced album lyrically. Nobody had ever touched this level of not only vocabulary, but the way that he was fitting in these multisyllabic rhyme schemes within each other and had that enriched vocabulary. It blew me away because I had heard many albums that came out before 94, and there's nothing that really compares to this. And what's interesting too is the fact that Nas, you know, he admitted this himself. He didn't put out this album to sell records. He had a different motivation. For him, the whole idea was he felt like his soul was trapped in the ghetto, and that for him to make this album was kind of like him calling out to escape from the streets. And that's what it ended up doing for him because obviously it caught so much fire and it, you know, grabbed everybody's attention within the community. And what's cool about this album is that Nas really wants to, you know, take off his shoes and put them on your feet. He wants you to smell the sidewalks. He wants you to taste what he's tasting. And that's what this album does for me. Like, I'm able to visualize all of his words so descriptively. And when you look at the production, you have DJ Premier, you have Pete Rock, you have some of the greatest producers of all time. And you can tell he did so much fucking digging through crates, bro, to find these jazz samples that are exquisite. And you also have on a song like Life's a Bitch, you have Nas's father who came in and did a trumpet solo. So to me, the reason why I think this is the greatest of all time is simply because if I were to erase every album that ever came out in the genre and just be left with Illmatic, I feel like the whole genre could be rebuilt off just that one album, because you have everything you need. You have top-notch lyricism at the highest level. You have a concept album because Nas is literally taking you through what his life is like throughout this ghetto and just all of the experiences that he's witnessed. You have sampled production as well as a mix of live instruments, which is a beautiful blend, and just an album that not only influenced people that came after him, but influenced artists that were even out around the same time, because Tupac said that he wouldn't have made Me Against the World if it wasn't for this album. Like, it forced him to go into more of an introspective mode, and I feel like that's the effect it had on the whole industry, is like, I gotta really step up and evolve my pen game. I gotta come with better bars, because what Nas brought to the table was fucking game-changing.
It was game-changing, and it's a very interesting conversation with Illmatic, because I think that if I had to be completely unbiased out of my conversation, and if you really like break it down, like, it probably is the best rap album of all time. Like, I just feel as if, to my own enjoyment, like, I found myself going back to Pimp a Butterfly, and I feel as if I prefer it as an album just from my own listening.
You know what it is? I feel like this was the landmark album. I feel like this was the album that made the whole music world take hip-hop seriously as an art form and push the genre forward more intellectually as well.
Not only that, but like, you know, there's university classes that are studying this album right now just for how rich the storytelling is on the album. And I think that's what's the most impressive about it, is like, you know, I wouldn't have gotten GKMC if I didn't get Illmatic. It's as simple as that. And when you look at, you know, how detailed the writing is, like, it is absolutely incredible. Another thing is, like, I can't believe he did New York State of Mind in one take. You know, you listen to how
he did that in one take. I didn't know that.
Apparently, he did it in one take. And what's interesting about it is, guys, let me know, by the way, in the comment section. I read it. Let me know, you know, if I got that wrong. But I'm telling you, man, like, when you listen to that track list, there's this certain type of hunger that comes out of Nas's voice that I've never heard from any other MC on an album. And that's what I'm being honest about. It's like, he had this vision of pushing hip-hop to the next level, and he knew that Illmatic was going to do that. And that's what's so beautiful about it, is that, you know, not only has it done it, but it went even further than that. You know, the way that the culture is recognized now is by Illmatic. You know, it's a staple. It's like American history at this point. And that's what I find so beautiful about the album too, is, you know, yes, you could enjoy the music and, you know, you could have a crazy fucking jam for the weekend, but it's culture. It's important. You know, this is going to be studied in history books in 100 years from now, and people are going to go back to the literary devices and, like, you know, let's say the poems throughout this album. You know,
double entendres, bro, it's everything.
Poems, bro. Like,
he became a prophet, bro. He literally became a prophet, and you have songs where he's literally, you know, writing to his friend that's in jail. Like, the storytelling was magnificent, and I think that it really raised the levels of, you know, just streams of consciousness for other rappers to come after. And it showed you this counterculture of New York the same way a movie like Taxi Driver did, where it showed you this grim underworld. And like I said, I just think that it really pushed people to be more intellectual with their writing. And apart from that, like I said, bro, this album has influenced everybody. This album influenced Ghostface Killah, who was around before Nas even came out. It's influenced all of TDE, who was known as the best roster of the 2010s decade.
Listen, so actually, guys, if you guys want to see more about, like, this thing about Nas doing New York State of Mind in one take, go to Genius. DJ Premier actually explains how Nas recorded the whole New York State of Mind in one take, and that's fucking ridiculous. That's stupid.
Straight out the fucking dungeons, bro.
That is ridiculous. Fuck. So obviously this is a super fun conversation to have, guys. Like, you know, and don't take it too seriously, because at the end of the day, it's all subjective, and someone's number one might not be yours, but who knows? He might be, you know, beating you in that competition. But guys, thank you so much for coming through today. We really appreciate it. And listen, we're also doing these podcasts on iTunes and on Spotify. So if you guys want to access that, the link is in the description. Our audio experience is amazing. You guys are going to be able to listen to it in the car, with your friends, whatever it is. Not only that, but we have a ton of content coming out. So this week's very interesting. And if you guys want to go check out our content spread, hit the subscribe button and go visit our channel. Again, thank you for watching this, and we'll catch you in the next one.